Hi guys, today I'll be taking a look at a gaming switch, the Kailh Speed Gold. Let's get started. Now, the Kailh Speed Gold is not only a gaming switch, but it's marketed as a clicky gaming switch. In fact, this is one of the only two clicky gaming switches I know of, with the other being the Kailh Speed Pink. However, the Speed Gold isn't part of Kailh's newer Super Speed lineup. Instead, the Super Speed Bronze is the only clicky switch in that lineup. Now, pricing wise, these are $31 for 110 switches on Kailh's website, placing these in the budget range. And this is what they look like when disassembled. Feel free to pause the video. Now, let's move on to the switch characteristics. On-center key presses are extremely smooth with no hints of scratchiness or inconsistencies for the majority of the switches. It's very close to perfection. Off-center key presses, however, do have noticeable moderate scratchiness, especially at slower key presses, but I still wouldn't call them scratchy per se. Overall, they're smoother than average and could be improved with some lubrication. 6 out of 10. Now, according to Kailh, these switches have an actuation force of 50 grams at 1.4mm, a peak tactile force of 60 grams, and a total travel of 3.5mm. Now, in terms of the actual key feel, the weighting is to my preference despite the light actuation point. It's the tactile bump that makes it tolerable to use. However, its inconsistency is, well, all over the place, with many switches slightly differing in weighting, making typing on them less predictable. Overall, while I'm a big fan of the weighting, its inconsistency issues bring the whole switch down quite a bit, but it isn't the worst I've felt. 6 out of 10. Now, in case you aren't aware, this is a click jacket switch, and they more often than not don't deliver an amazing soundtrack. And of course, these switches also fall under that same umbrella. They sound unrefined and plasticky compared to their click bar counterpart. Overall, I'm glad these types of switches are slowly disappearing since these don't sound great at all. 3 out of 10. Now, take a listen and enjoy. Now, first things first, given these are inconsistent, it's fairly easy to mistype or miss a key entirely, making them quite unreliable in this sense. And yes, despite them being labeled as speed switches, it's sometimes hard to actually type fast on them. Secondly, the key feel is mushy at times. Now, I'm not exactly sure why this is, but I've never been a fan of its short but noticeable pre-travel. It's always felt unrefined and not quite right. Finally, whilst it's cool to see a gaming clicky switch, these aren't suited for any major typing work at all. So if you're a writer or a programmer, this isn't for you. It's a gaming switch first, a typing switch second. Overall, these are weird switches. It covers an undefined middle ground where someone who wants this wants an advantage in games, but for whatever reason wants a crappy sounding clicky switch at the same time. 5 out of 10. Now for gaming. As I've mentioned before, this is a gaming switch first and a typing switch second. So how did they perform here? Well, when it comes to slower paced games, they performed reasonably well with no issues. Well, unless you count the god-awful clicking noise it makes in the background. However, they did show noticeable binding during off-center key presses in faster paced games, which didn't really affect me being I'm a casual gamer, but it could throw off some more competitive gamers. Additionally, I much prefer the way this switch is set up with the higher actuation point despite it feeling mushy, and that's an unusual statement given I'm usually against this, but Kailh did a decent job of it somehow. Overall, this isn't going to replace a regular linear or tactile switch for gaming, but it's a decent performer in case you're one of the very few who are interested. 6 out of 10. In conclusion, I've said it twice before, but I'll say it again for the final time. This is a gaming switch first and a typing switch second, so know what your priorities are before buying them. The final score for this switch is 26 out of 50 or 52%, which is close to average for a click jacket switch. And that's the end of the review. Next time, well, I'm not actually sure what I'll be looking at. It might be a speed switch or it might be something else. Anyway, until then, take care and goodbye.